I will be very, very surprised if the CCP survives the death of the yuan, because they've taken all these dollars and treasury notes that are worthless. Their own currency is worthless. Even if they have a lot of gold, they're going to have to quickly get it out to their people. But even if they do survive it, like I said, the Chinese are going to spend a lot of time with sky-high prices, sky-high gold prices compared to everybody else, and then the gold's going to leave, the stuff is going to go in, but their industries are going to lie quite dormant.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for January 6th through January 13th, 2025, while supplies last. This week we feature the 1-ounce Canadian Silver Falcon coin at just $2.75 over spot, the lowest price we've had on any sovereign coin in years. We also have the 1/10-ounce UK Gold Britannia coin at just $29.99 over melt. And finally, 1-ounce gold Canadian maples are just $59 over spot. Again, one of the lowest prices we've had on gold sovereign coins in years. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're delighted to have this returning guest today. Phil Lowe is the founder of a Rumble channel, The Bitter Draft, a expose of all things economic for the ordinary man and demystifying a lot of the things we haven't been told but need to know for the good of our families and our communities. Phil, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance.
Thanks, Dunnigan. And I have a perfect analogy for myself, if I may. Have you ever watched Star Trek?
Oh, yes.
If you've ever watched Star Trek, you'll know that often a problem is presented and two crew members come and they say, oh, we need to increase the carbonium levels or the positronic matrix is about to explode. And then there's a third crewman who says, it's like blowing up a balloon or it's like pulling a rubber band all the way back. I am that third crewman. I did not come up with the solution, but I came up with an analogy for the solution that the audience can understand.
Well, we appreciate that. I, not the least. I get to be in such a privileged position here because I get to sit in this chair as everyman on behalf of all of our 105,000+ viewers. And actually, we have about twice that many viewers. That's just our subscribers on YouTube, and as well as Rumble, Brighteon, et cetera. But the point is, I get to be here and ask questions on the behalf of our audience. Sometimes they submit them to us, and I get to be first in line to hear some of these explanations that I really appreciate, including physical metaphors, which work very well in my book. So you and I have been talking about some of the things that are unnecessarily mysterious about things that are affecting us right now, such as inflation, how it affects ordinary people. And that's one of the questions we wanted to talk about is why inflation causes a breakdown in the division of labor. In other words, there should be a natural and healthy division of labor in any society, but inflation breaks that down. It messes it up. And as you explained, people end up doing unproductive work and everyone ends up poorer than just the direct effects of monetary inflation. Could you dig into that for us and help us understand how inflation hurts us in this way?
Sure. And to do that, so in my channel, I often use a cave. I made a fictional caveman village. And I use the caveman village as sort of a modern analogy because everyone can kind of understand what it's like to live in a small village. So let's go to the caveman village that I use. And this village is, it's prosperous, but there's not a lot of wiggle room. So, everyone has to get up every single day and get to work to make sure they have enough calories that they're going to eat. They have enough calories to eat and, they can build the defenses to keep the lions out or whatever it is they need. So there's no time for, sitting around, thinking about leisure activities, at least not much, right? It's a medieval or a caveman-y village. Anyway, and the village trades in gold. That's one other thing. They've found a gold mine and they either trade in gold nuggets or maybe some rudimentary gold coins, we could say, right? One of the cavemen, his name is Thrak, and I use him a lot in my analogies as well. And Thrak has decided, he came up with a solution. He realized that people are lugging around these gold nuggets and the bags are heavy and, they can be purse snatched or whatever. So Thrak came up with a solution and he told the village, he said, look, instead of going out into the fields, I will stay at my cave and I will guard your gold for you. So you come to me and you give me your gold nuggets and I'll put it in a special part in my cave and it'll have round-the-clock security, and I will give you these green. I take these pine cones and I paint them green, and they represent a gold certificate. And you can come back to me with these green pine cones at any time and get your gold back, and I'll charge a small fee for it. And the people love this idea. They say, this is great. The pine cones are much lighter than the gold, so we will definitely take those pine cones. And before you know it, the entire village, most of the gold's sitting in Thrax Cave, and people are using pine cones instead. And they keep their pine cones under their mattress, safe and secure in the knowledge that they can at any time go to Thrax Cave and redeem them for their gold nuggets. Now, Thrak is he's a bit of a shifty guy. He's always looking for a quick buck. And he realized, he says, the whole town is kind of using my pine cones. I could just paint a couple extra pine cones and put those into the system, buy some things I want, with these pine cones. And I don't think anyone's going to be the wiser. So he does that. And of course, nothing immediately happens at all. The pine cones are gladly accepted. And so he does a little more. And before you know it, there's a lot more pine cones than there are gold nuggets to redeem. And we all know where this is going. This is going to end one day in a bank run where people show up with the pine cones. And, and they say, we don't think you have the gold in there. And then, of course, he gets thrown into the volcano and, they go back to whatever they were doing. But we're not at that point yet. So right now, the pine cones are circulating wildly. And the village elder, Crom, the village leader, he comes before his village and he says, citizens of my village, as you can see, we are very prosperous. Our granaries are full. We have an advanced banking system now. And, we're doing very prosperous, and there's lots of pine cones in our system. And as everyone knows, pine cones are money. So the fact that we have lots of pine cones means we're very rich. And so therefore, I think it is time that we dedicate a lot of our resources into building a monument to our village, because these jerks down the street started on Stonehenge, and, they're going to make us look bad. So we need to outdo Stonehenge. So we're going to build a water slide, and not just any water slide, a water slide that will last 10,000 years, made out of stone from here all the way down to the sea. But to do that, I'm going to need to, we need to finance this. So our good friend Thrak here generously offered to finance all of this with all the pine cones we need. And we'll start recruiting men from the village to work on this project instead of, going out and harvesting berries and, shepherding goats and primitive agriculture, whatever it is they were doing. So about half the men of the village start working on this project, and Crom is going to Thrak to get the pine cones to pay for this, and they start building this giant water slide. And, they get moving, and people start realizing that there's a lot of pine cones, but there's less berries than there ever were before. There's less goats than there ever were before. There's less farming than there ever was before. And people are feeling poorer and poorer and poorer. And they say, well, this water slide is going to be great once it gets going. But, we're kind of getting really poor around here. And of course, even if the water slide, my original example had the water slide half finished, but let's even finish it. They finish the water slide. And then they realize, oh no, the pine cones are actually not money, right? There's a million of them, and Thrak can make as many more as he wants, and they have no inherent value. And of course, they go stomping off to Thrak to get their gold out, because the merchants won't take pine cones anymore. And of course, Thrak doesn't have the gold, so they throw him in the volcano. And now the village is in a very poor state. The granaries are empty. There's no more berries, right? They've eaten all the capital. They had capital savings acquired that they have since drawn down and eaten to work on this water slide. Now, you might say, well, they have a water slide out of it, Phil. And that's true. And the water slide's not, I'm sure the water slide's nice. Let's say the water slide's wonderful. They don't have any time to use it, right? They have to go out farming and, primitive hunting and all that stuff. So there's no time to use it. It's a complete boondoggle, and the water slide falls into disrepair, and, no one ever speaks of it again. And, they go back to whatever they were doing before, but now they're at a much, much poorer state. So if you want to play this if you want to move this to the modern day times, let's think about something like the Apollo program. Now, everyone's going to think, okay, the Neil Armstrong landing on the moon was, a modern marvel. It was a marvel of human achievement. I know some people, probably some of your viewers, probably think that didn't happen. I'm willing to believe it did happen for now until I see evidence otherwise, but that's besides the point. Assuming it did happen, assuming that the Apollo program was completely legit, nothing was fake, it was still a giant waste of money in the Austrian economic sense. Because what was done? We spent, $50 billion in 1960s money to have a man walk around on the moon and then come back. And you say, but Phil, in the case, the justification they used was the Russians are going to do it first. So if we don't get a man on the moon, the Russians are going to get a man on the moon first. And then, then God knows what happens after that, right? And you say, well, what if they get a man on the moon first? What's the downside, right? Well, they're going to win. They're going to win the Cold War if we don't get a man on the moon first. And then, of course, we get the man on the moon, and they're still not done. Well, now we got to get a dune buggy up there. I mean, if we don't get a dune buggy on the moon done again, kiss your freedoms goodbye. The Russians will get a dune buggy up there first, and then it's all over. So they just, it just kept going and going in this giant public works project, and it was all, there was nothing productive in our day to day that was improved in that. We had a nice feeling. I'm sure I wasn't there in 1969, but for those who were, I'm sure you had the nice feeling of like when your team wins the Super Bowl, you walk around the next couple days feeling great. But that was really about it. I mean, nothing magical happened after that. And certainly everyone's day-to-day life was made. If they had to pay the cost of the Apollo program at the time in gold and silver, I think people would have revolted against this, said, no, this is way too expensive. We're not doing this. Because they were able to put it on the credit card, and now we're paying for it now with all the interest, at the time, they said, oh, yeah, we can afford this. This isn't so bad. That's the thing with the pine cones, right? If the pine cones create this, it's called the illusion of prosperity. So you are convinced that you are much wealthier than you are. And when you are convinced you are much wealthier than you are, you do things you would not otherwise do, like build a giant water slide out of stone or go swimming or go starting a space program. So all the resources are actually misallocated right now. I know it's gonna be a rude awakening when people realize their resources have been terribly misallocated, and even people who think they are doing very productive work right now are going to be surprised when the gold standard returns. And let me use Miles Franklin for an example, Dunnigan. If I can take a $5 bill and I can go to any 7-Eleven and I can say, "Excuse me, sir, I would like change for this $5 bill," and they hand me 20 quarters made out of silver, 90% silver. I can get silver at any 7-Eleven, any bank, any shop. What's the business case for Miles Franklin, right? Miles Franklin's going to have a tough time in a gold standard. Now, I'm sure Andy Schectman will find something useful to do, something productive to do. But the thing that he is doing right now, which is exchanging metal for paper, will no longer be a useful. There will not be a business case for it on a pure gold standard. That does not mean he's not providing a valuable service now in clown world because we're in bizarro world. But when we're not in bizarro world, Miles Franklin's going to look very different. It's probably going to be a bank, as Rafi says. And additionally, if everyone is walking around with gold and silver in their pockets, then what good is a channel of mine where I say, hey, that gold and silver you're using in your pockets is actually money? They're going to say, we know it's money, right? So we're going to have to find other things to do too. I don't know exactly what I'm going, and there's no way my day job is going to survive the end game. So I don't know what my destiny is when we're back on a gold and silver standard, but I am very excited to find out.
I'm trying to think if the title for this should be Inflation for Cavemen or Inflation for Dummies. But anyway, it's very helpful to think it through because you strip it down to its essentials. And any problem or phenomenon in our lives that is unfortunately made mysterious, so difficult for everyone to understand that we just plod along, sleepwalking and doing our part. But we have this gnawing gut feeling that something's not right, that this is harder than it should be, that somehow this isn't fair. And it's refreshing to have something stripped down. That's what stories do for us. They strip things down to their essential elements and help us to see the truths that are in there. Now, one of the things that's been rather controversial about those who do accumulate physical, tangible assets in times of bizarro world that we're living in, and most or all the countries of the world are living in, is that they can be seen as, or especially they can be painted as the bad guys, those who are hoarding essential resources. FDR certainly turned countrymen against each other, saying that those that were hoarding the gold were holding the country down and holding the economy down because it wasn't allowing the money to circulate. And so we need to turn it all into the government so that it can be made productive, et cetera, et cetera. So why is it critically important in times of stress not to seize the gold, even from those who got rich during the inflationary times?
So there are three. I'm gonna approach this with three separate directions. The first is the moral direction. So everyone responding to the price signal, because the price signal was messed up. We're all, like I said, doing things we're not supposed to be doing. Our resources are misallocated, but there are people profiting from the misallocation. So to go back to the caveman example, the man running the quarry suddenly got a huge demand for his resources from the government, and the government paid him very, very well. And let's say he allocated his resources very well. He bought a lot of gold. He didn't trust Thrak, and he bought a lot of gold with the pine cones that were being given him to provide the stone for the water slide, right? Did he do anything wrong? No. The government came to him, Crom came to him and said, we need your stone to build the water slide. He provided it. He did a good job of it. They built the water slide. But then, of course, once it's revealed that the water slide was a misallocation of the resources, then, people are upset. And people look at him and they see how rich he got. Someone like Elon Musk, right? They see just how rich he got. And I know he's crusading as a free speech warrior and all that stuff, but most of his companies are heavily government subsidized. Now he says Tesla has never asked for a subsidy and that GM was the one who asked for all the EV subsidies. But once those subsidies are there, if Tesla doesn't take those subsidies and GM does, then the GM cars are, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 cheaper than the Teslas. So he has to take the subsidies the companies have because we're in clown world with misallocated resources. Anyway, if Elon Musk does not buy gold and silver, and I don't know if he will, he is not going to be a rich man in the end game. But assuming he puts some of his resources into gold and silver, he could be, once again, fantastically wealthy on the other side of this. And the question is, should the government, and the idea for this question actually came from Steve Bannon, because Steve Bannon on his show is really yelling. He's saying the rich need to pay their fair share. And what he's talking about is taxes. He's saying the rich are not being taxed and the poor and the middle class are being taxed. The problem with taxation is theft. So, taxing anyone is stealing from anyone. So saying that, we need to tax the rich means we need to steal from those guys, because even though we're stealing from you, the problem isn't that we're, stealing too much from you. The problem is we're not stealing enough from these other people over here, right? So the idea that, we need to take from them because they're not doing their fair share is the road to Pol Pot. So I don't like hearing, the incoming administration with saying those words. There's a long road to get from where we are to Pol Pot. I understand that. I'm just saying that's the wrong direction. So that's the moral issue. They did not responding to the price signal unless you stole it. If you steal somebody's pine cones, you're committing theft. But using the pine cones that everyone thinks is the money in and of itself is not theft. You're just responding to the price signal yourself. And if you're chasing dollars, you're in the price. You're in our monetary system, so you're participating in it. Unless you want to hide in the woods and trade, furs for silver, you're participating in the modern economy. So you're part of this, right? The second reason, beyond the moral reason that they did nothing wrong, the second reason is that it sets a very bad precedent. Once you set the stage, again, this is the road to Pol Pot. Once you set the stage that it's okay to take money from the extremely wealthy, you have there was no law passed. You're just, I want your resources, so I'm taking them. Once you set that precedent, you can do it to anybody. You can say, well, Dunnigan, he got rich warning everybody about the fake money, so we're going to take his gold too. He was a hoarder, right? He's a kulak. So you start on this. And the third reason is the practicality of it. If the state starts seizing gold, people are just going to bury it, right? We're going to bury it. That's why Keith Weiner has this great example. The reason they keep finding gold, in England, these farmers will be tilling their fields and they'll show up with a Roman treasure chest. They'll get dug up, from the 400 AD. And the reason the gold was in that treasure chest in the middle of a field was because it was too dangerous to use the gold at the time, right? Rome had collapsed, the empire was collapsing, and England had just, splintered off into complete violence and chaos. So the Roman citizens buried their gold and didn't talk about it. And then after a few generations, they forgot where it was. So if people start burying their gold, then we are really in trouble, because then the money is not going to flow and the market's not going to clear. And then we really are looking at, mass casualty events kind of things. Now, if the state doesn't seize the gold, people like you and I and everybody else, we're going to buy things. We're going to get the money out, and the people are going to quickly find out what they should have been doing this entire time, and they're going to start doing it. And then we're going to be very prosperous again.
that rediscovery of natural productivity is what would resurface if you remove all the artificial constraints that keep us in this clown world, these unreasonable rules and constraints. And from that can emerge prosperity because people start doing what makes sense and what is actually needed, what's actually desirable, what's actually beneficial. Another thing that's, speaking of hoarding, there's been a great amount of concern over the East versus West divide. You could call it the BRICS Plus versus the Western, perhaps United States and England-led financial worlds, where the gold, physical gold in particular, and silver seem to be flowing from the Western world to the Eastern world. And there's this idea and observation and some data to back it up that there's enormous hoards of physical gold and silver being amassed by such countries as China, Russia, India, etc. There's concern on the part of many that, according to the saying that the new golden rule is whoever has the gold makes the rules, that kind of like your analogy of the Cold War with why we had to get to the moon first, that if, in fact, China, for example, ends up with an untold, much larger hoard of gold than they're admitting to right now, that could be very destabilizing to the globe, the geopolitics, etc. Why is it that you say that the gold hoard of China is nothing to worry about?
Yeah, so this is very, very counterintuitive, but I promise it's true, and I'm gonna explain why. And when I'm done, I think you'll understand. But yes, China's gold hoard is absolutely nothing to worry about. Now, this does not affect the individual. What I'm about to say does not affect the individual person. You, of course, should accumulate as much gold as you reasonably want, without going crazy over it. But geographically, when one region has more gold than the rest of the world, good things do not happen to that region. Typically, bad things happen to it. So let's think about this. Let's think about this logically right now. So let's say the end game hits, and the China says, "Surprise! We have 30,000 tons of gold," and we go to Fort Knox, and a moth flies out, and there's nothing in there. And they have so much gold in China that they're making manhole covers out of it because they don't know what to do with the stuff, right? And we can't seem to find any of it. So prices in gold terms, because we're going to go back on a gold standard, are going to be sky high in China, sky high. And prices in America in gold terms are going to be very, very low. So a Chinese person is going to say, geez, those American washing machines, they're a lot cheaper than these Chinese washing machines. So I'm going to buy an American washing machine. And, they exchange the gold for the washing machine, and it goes, and pretty soon Chinese industry is collapsing, right? The factories are empty, and American and the rest of the world's, industry is, prospering. And the Chinese citizens are, they did have a lot of gold, but they're sort of laying around, not doing very much, being, full of sloth, because they don't have to. They have all the gold. They can just import all this stuff. This sounds very familiar to us right now, right? Because we are pretending as if we have all this gold. The notes we're generating is a pretending that we have all this gold. It's the pine cones. All right. So we are pretending we're very rich and sending out all these dollars and importing all this stuff. Meanwhile, our own industry is collapsing. So the fear that people have is that when the dollar ends, that that's the CCP is going to say, hey, we're going to restart the Ponzi the Federal Reserve did. We're just going to have the Chinese central bank, the People's Bank of China, be in charge of this. So we're gonna lock all the gold up in Fort Sun Tzu instead of Fort Knox, right? And we're gonna start generating yuan off of that. America spent 150 years, from 1776 to like 1913, with as the poster child of honest money. For the most part, there were greenbacks, and maybe not everything was totally up and up on every single time, but compared to the rest of the world, it was the absolute poster child of honest money. And we spent, and then another 50 years of post-World War II, being the only country that wasn't blown apart by war, and we still had, all the gold. We ended up with all the gold, right? And then we spent the next 50 years squandering that from the 70s, right? We squandered all that goodwill. The CCP has none of that goodwill. Nobody trusts China to honor their notes until they see actual redeemability of their yuan. So the CCP will have to spend, a good century probably having redeemable gold before they can, start that same dollar Ponzi scheme that we just went through. And I promise, after this thing blows up, it's going to be generations before anything like that could be tried again. So, in if you think, to go back to the caveman analogy, our resources are misallocated, but if you think ours are misallocated, China has cities, entire cities that nobody lives in. And not only does no one live in them, no one can live in them because the buildings are falling apart as soon as they're constructed. So they have their resources are far, far more misallocated than ours are. And they have we have a pressure valve of elections to sort of adjust to take the pressure off. Say what you will about Trump, he was not the choice of the state. The state wanted Harris, that's very clear. So we could still, we could say, I'm furious, I'm going to go vote the bums out. And sometimes you actually can vote the bums out. Maybe they're replaced with other bums, but whatever, they're new bums. China has none of that. So the only way, this could end very, let me put it this way. I will be very, very surprised if the CCP survives the death of the yuan, because they've taken all these dollars and treasury notes that are worthless. Their own currency is worthless. Even if they have a lot of gold, they're going to have to quickly get it out to their people. But even if they do survive it, like I said, the Chinese are going to spend a lot of time with sky-high prices, sky-high gold prices compared to everybody else, and then the gold's going to leave, the stuff is going to go in, but their industries are going to lie quite dormant. Now, let me give some historical examples to back this up. If you look at a California boom town during the gold rush, right, what happens? The miners come out down from the hills and they've got their bags of gold and they go into something like San Francisco. In San Francisco, a breakfast at a hotel might be, a nugget of gold, right? And that would buy a team of horses back east, right? So the prices were skyrocketing. And so what happened? All the prostitutes, all the gamblers, all the con men, they all rushed into San Francisco to try and, milk these miners for all they were worth. And, the town just became this like boom town. Eventually, all the gold, all the gold is mined and brought in. And then the miners are, they live their indolent lives. And then the gold leaves and gets dispersed among the people. And then what happens? California goes back to doing what it was doing before there was gold, right? The gold thing stopped. People went back to farming. Another perfect example is the Spanish Empire, right? So the Spanish conquered the Inca and the Aztec, and they imported all that gold and silver, and their country really was not well served by it at all. They had lots of gold, but Spain right now is one of the poorest countries in Western Europe. So even hundreds of years later is still not well served by that imperial gold rush. And the third example is us, right? We had all the gold. All the gold for 50 years. Are we doing great right now? I would think most people would say no.
Back to your China example, if you could fill us in, because you talked about China not having developed as much goodwill, and I'm following you when you talk about like their brutal restrictive policies on their own people, that sort of thing. But what about their strategic alliances that they're forming all over the world, where there are natural resources, rare earth metals, where they're building ports, roads, infrastructure for countries all over Africa, all over Asia, et cetera, and even South America, in spreading their influence with this? We'll build this stuff for you, but then we expect to be given a stream off of your natural resources, et cetera. Does that affect the argument that you're making about China? Just when you simplified it down to just China being this sitting on top of the world's largest hoard of physical gold, but having misallocated resources in their command-driven economy structure. How is that affected as you look at their strategic alliances that they're forming all over the world?
Sure. So a lot of the China people, you say, China's become sort of replaced the USSR as the new bugaboo that we must always have to worry about it. And a lot of the people promoting these ideas are fairly anti-liberty, because what they're trying to do is to convince us that to beat China, we have to become China, right? We need a command-driven economy because China's eating our lunch, right? So we need by force to seize all the gold and stick it back in Fort Knox or whatever. If you want a good idea of what's happening to the Chinese empire, there's a great documentary, I think it's called The Empire of Dust. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's got the famous meme of the Chinese guy going, "It's all so tiresome." So it's about I think it's a mining company in the Congo. It's a Chinese mining company in the Congo, and they're just following this guy. And you can just the wealth is just disappearing into the Congo. Like the Congolese drivers, the Chinese order, 50 loads of timber to show up, and 2 show up, right? And then the guy's like, where's the rest of the timber? Oh, I don't know. My cousin ran off with it, and it's just this, manager trying to get this mining operation going in the middle of the Congo, and it's a documentary. It's not a drama. It's an actual documentary, and just going through, and the Africans just disappear with the goods day after day after day, and if you read the comment sections of it, it's not flattering to Africans. I would say the African countries are the farthest away from the money printers from the American money printers, so their currencies are constantly hyperinflating the fastest. If Africa was on a silver standard or a gold standard, you would see the most parsimonious, industrious, people on the face of the earth. It's because their currency is hyperinflating all the time anyway. There's no reason to save. There's nothing to save in. So they might as well live for today and abandon tomorrow, which is what the rest of us are doing too. Now, the Chinese Empire is funded by inflation, as all empires are. The Roman Empire debased its currency just the same. All empires are funded by inflation. When the inflation stops, the Chinese Empire is going to collapse along with the American Empire. So I am not worried at all about China somehow seizing the day at the end of this.
It's quite interesting because from personal experience in a lifetime of engineering and traveling around the world, seeing such as Eastern European and other economies where there's black markets that have sprung up because, like in the shadow of the Soviet influence and so on, where people just didn't trust the government, so there was a cash economy that was separate from the official economy, and people get very ingenious in how to take care of their family and themselves. And anyway, that's the other saying from Gartner, futuristic consult to a company that I was with, saying culture eats strategy for lunch. So when you talk about, Chinese having a strategy and entering into some of these countries, but then they encounter the local culture that has been formed over centuries of post-colonial repression and so on, and people taking care of themselves and their own. Quite interesting. Phil, you've put out a lot of provocative and educational videos on your channel, The Bitter Draft. Where will people find that exactly, and how can they get plugged in?
Can I actually end with one concluding thought before I give out my sign off? Okay. So you have several guests that come on your show, and I do respect them. I was thinking of people like Bill Holter or Market Sniper that are advocating a very negative they've gone off. Both of them have gone off to the middle of nowhere to wait out the end game, let's say. I want to tell your viewers that we should not doom. Stop dooming. We, your viewers, are the next round of capitalists. We are the next Andrew Carnegie's and JP Morgan's and JD Rockefellers, and hopefully we're going to be more liberty-oriented than they were. And we cannot hide. If everyone goes and hides in their bunkers, we're just going to come out of our bunkers in 6 months, and nothing will have changed, and we'll just have 6 months less food. So we must walk among the lepers, and we must buy their stuff, and we must invest in their businesses, because we are the capitalists. And when we do so, we will create a thriving and prosperous leper colony, which is not quite the metaphor I was going for, but it's too late now. So you can find me on The Bitter Draft at rumble.com, and you can email me at thebitterdraft@gmail.com.
The way you're talking reminds me of Rafi Farber, the endgame investor, where he talks about the necessity of visioning a fair and equitable and basically grassroots economy in the future where people really own real things and do real things and help each other out in real ways. So it's absolutely essential to not just prepare to weather the storm and resist hard times, but to actually be creative and innovative and productive and constructive, and think about how are we going to build a society that's based on mutual goodwill and doing the right thing by our families. And I think you're right that a big part of that is breaking free from the collapsing the whole edifice of theft that is represented by fiat currency and inflation and taxation, and that's often not a smooth transition because those who are in power are usually loath to give it up without a fight. So it's going to be a very eventful time. We were talking about that before we started this broadcast. 2025 certainly has the earmarks of a very interesting time. Andy Scheckman reminds us that that's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. So hopefully it won't be too interesting in that way. But very grateful to have your presence here with us, Phil. And there'll be a link to your website on Rumble, your channel on Rumble in the description of this video. And so people check that out. And reminder, only half of our viewers are subscribers. So if you're not a subscriber to Liberty and Finance, it's free and you won't miss a single thing by just subscribing. You can do it in YouTube, Brighteon, Rumble, and you can just email us, go to libertyandfinance.com, put in your email address, click submit, make sure you confirm on the confirming email. You'll get one email in your inbox per day with our latest interviews, including all of our interviews with Phil and our other guests, as well as weekly specials. And we just thank you, Phil Lowe, for joining us here again on Liberty and Finance.
Thank you, Dunning. Appreciate it.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin weekly specials for January 6th through January 13th, 2025, while supplies last. This week we feature the 1-ounce Canadian Silver Falcon coin at just $2.75 over spot, the lowest price we've had on any sovereign coin in years. We also have the 1/10-ounce UK Gold Britannia coin at just $29.99 over melt. And finally, 1-ounce gold Canadian maples are just $59 over spot. Again, one of the lowest prices we've had on gold sovereign coins in years. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.